This is my 12th and last talk on world history. I've reached the 20th century. It's a 60-second summary. Well, what shall we say about the 20th century and the 21st century? There have been enormous changes. Has the Bible anything to say on these matters? And I think there are 7 things that I want to look at where I think the Bible has had something to say. Firstly, the increase in the population. It's undoubtedly amazing to see the population has increased from about 1.5 billion to 7 billion. And the very first thing that God had asked humans to do was fill the earth. Well, I don't think we did it in obedience to God, but we certainly have done it. The second thing that's interesting is the growth in technology and also the growth in transport. Now, I know the pandemic has brought everyone to a grinding halt, but before the pandemic, we were actually traveling rapidly around the world. And it talks about the growth of knowledge and also the growth of transport in Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. And funnily enough, Bacon, in his introduction to his work on science, uses this very verse to announce the scientific revolution to the world. And he got it right, actually, because in many ways, the scientific revolution does bring Daniel chapter 12, verse 4 into play. Then we have the interesting thing about how gender and the issue of the role of women has changed quite fundamentally. And this is definitely something that has been noted. And also the changing attitudes towards gender. And one can see this possibly being looked at in Romans chapter 1, that when people reject the concept of God as creator, there will be changes to how people see this whole issue. So I think one could argue that would be the case. Another issue that is interesting is the spread of the gospel. It's quite clear. Jesus said that prior to the second coming, the gospel will go around the whole world. And ultimately, one sees this amazingly done in Africa and Asia. You see it in South America. In fact, almost everywhere in the world but Europe. The gospel is growing at an incredible rate. And now it's estimated 2 billion people are Christians. And I think there's very clear evidence that maybe not only every major language, but all the medium-scale languages of the world will have a portion of the Bible in their languages produced in the next few years. And this is certainly something that the Bible predicted. Another prediction, which is really interesting, is the establishment of the State of Israel. This is clearly understood throughout the whole of the time from the 17th century onwards, that Protestant believers look to the Jews being restored, and this comes from Romans chapter 11, and is implied as well in Jesus when he talks about the treading down of Jerusalem at the time the Gentiles is completed. And so the restoration of Israel, but firstly in the Balfour Declaration of 1917, then in the establishment of Israel in 1948, and the retaking of Jerusalem in 1967, seemed to be a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. So one could look at the changes of the 20th century and say that they do support the Bible as an accurate revelation from God. Where we are in the future in terms of the return of the Lord, that's an interesting question, and one which I think is worth thinking about. But as I'm dealing with history, I shall leave that to others. But thank you for listening.